Conversations with Garmamie. I am joined by Keith Hartshorn-Walton. How you doing, Keith?
I'm great, Garmamie.
I am really interested in this conversation here because we're going to be talking about the tuba, and you obviously play this instrument. And my first question is, why do you play the tuba? What's the story there?
Well, I'll give you my standard answer. Uh, I started music lessons at an early age, at age 6. I took piano because my brother was taking piano as well. And I just took off with it, really enjoyed it. Um, when it came time to choose an instrument at school, I take some drum lessons too on the side. There was a program being offered on the weekends that I used to go to. I got some drum lessons from an old army guy. But when it came time to pick a band instrument, because I had the cleft lip and palate, the teacher said, well, we think he should stay away from anything that involves a mouthpiece, trumpet or saxophone or anything like clarinet. Um, but you played drums before, that's great. So what we're going to do is we're going to put you on the drums in the concert band. We're going to put you on the electric bass, or maybe it was the other way around. I can't remember. So, okay, fine. And band starts in grade 7. And I remember just being looking with envy at the other kids, mostly for their instruments, because they got to put together these really cool looking instruments. One of the first things you have to learn in band class is how to put your flute or your clarinet or your saxophone together, and they're fascinating objects. I think every kid is always attracted to these instruments. And I was just sitting there with the drums; it was already put together. There's nothing to do, or the bass. I had nothing to put together, or nothing that seemed interesting. And nobody was playing the tuba in our school band, but it was sitting in one of these things, these practice rooms at the back and the band room. And I there was a tuba sitting in the back. And I asked my band teacher if anybody's playing that. He said no. He said, "Do you want to try it?" I said, "Yes, I do." So I took it home and dragged it all the way home. And my parents were completely unsuspecting that I brought this thing home. And I just fell in love with the sound it makes, and I've played it ever since. So that's why I play the tuba.
Now, you obviously you've been playing this instrument now for quite some time. What over the years, how has your relationship with this instrument evolved in terms of the genres of music you play and so on?
Well, that is a good question, and one I've obviously thought about. At first, I didn't think too much about it because I played piano and I did some other things, and I joined the Air Cadets in grade 8, and they have a really good music program, but my particular squadron didn't. But they suggested I join the music camp instead of the regular little 2 week basic camp. They said, no, you should go to the music camp, and you play tuba. They'll love to have you there. And between that and also my junior high school sent me to uh, a music camp in Manitoba, what they called the Peace Gardens. It was the international music camp. There were students there from North Dakota and from Manitoba all together. It was something borders were easily crossed back then, I guess. And so we had American and Canadian kids and event. So all of a sudden, because I played the tuba specifically, I was asked to go on these amazing experiences, free, 2 weeks to one camp and then 6 weeks to another camp, meeting all sorts of people. And I was like, wow, this instrument kind of takes you places. And so I started taking it more seriously. I never really considered it as a serious instrument, but because someone said, "Oh, you play that instrument? You seem to play it well. Well, we're gonna send you this place, send you that place." And you're always, if you play it well, you're always in demand. And so it opened a lot of doors. And so that's when I thought, well, maybe this is something I can do more seriously. As time went on, my career took me to the Army band, first of all. After high school, I joined the military. I was going to be a military tuba player and bass player. But that was the year in '94. They had a huge military budget cut. 16,000 personnel were cut that year, including right away half of the permanent band branch. So I just made it as far as the music school, and I hadn't even gone to university. I went straight into that career, and they I left the military with some assistance. I ended up going to university after all, and with the mind that I was going to be a classical tuba player, even though I'd picked up a lot of other things along the way, playing jazz, playing bass, bit of piano. And that was my focus at university for a while, was to play orchestral tuba, but always getting sort of drawn to these other things. And in the summers, I played bass on cruise ships, and the tuba. After I graduated from university, um, I played a bunch of interesting things. I really tried to play a lot of different stuff on the instrument as well as pursuing the orchestral stuff. I went to play with jazz musicians. Went to at a weekly gig at this club up on Saint Laurent Boulevard in Montreal, playing with really wild, crazy, out there music. I played with a bunch of different people, and when we graduated, my wife and I, we left Montreal. Didn't play the tuba much for a while, and it really didn't get played for several years as we tried to figure out what we were going to do with a life in music as a teacher and with our skills. I did a lot of completely non-musical jobs for a while, and this is an instrument that requires a lot of maintenance. It requires you to play it a lot to be good, and I just wasn't getting that time in. But I ended up, two things happened. I ended up entering a music competition on tuba in Toronto and doing very, very well and getting through to the national level and coming this shy of winning the big prize. And that sort of got me back in shape again. It's like, okay, I have this ability to play like this. And so that ended up leading to me getting my master's degree a few years, like about, I guess, 3 years after I had my bachelor's. I went to my master's at U of T, University of Toronto, and right after that, got a job playing with the Foothills Brass Quintet in Calgary, which is a full-time chamber ensemble. And that was my first time playing full-time. I had played with them 3 years, playing all sorts of music and traveling all over. Again, have tuba will travel. It took me all over the place. But that was becoming more of a self-directed musician, because as a quintet, there's only 5 of us. We're not part of an orchestra or someone else's band. We had to make our own decisions, do our own thing. And when that was over, and I came back to Ontario again, I ended up getting my doctorate. And this time they said, "What do you want to study on this instrument?" I said, "Well, I really want to study jazz. It's always been something I've wanted to do. It's something I have a real calling to do. And will you?" And they said, "Sure, we'll let you make that your focus." So between doing that and doing the doctorate and playing, it sort of led me to explore more and more the tuba as a solo expressive instrument in jazz and other forms. And the final notch in that was sometime after the degree and having 2 children, we moved to Ottawa. Not even really a big intent to play much music anymore, because in Toronto we were playing a lot of functions. I was playing piano for 4 different choirs. We were just very, very spread out, the 2 of us. We did a lot of different things. Melanie was teaching in school, teaching privately. She was singing in operas. Both of us had all these different activities we were doing. And we wanted to just sort of have a little bit of a reset in our life. And I'd actually got accepted at the U of O to go to law school, believe it or not.
Wow.
And that was something that I was thinking about doing, but decided not to do that and just come here, start all over again, reset button, slightly smaller market, and just see what happened. But what happened was word of the tuba got out again. And next thing I know, I was on the list to teach tuba at Carleton. I was playing sousaphone in a really good 8-piece brass marching band. I was playing more gigs than I'd played living near Toronto, to be frank, and doing the stuff I really loved. Doing things like playing at the Jazz Festival, doing things like playing at the Juno Fest, and playing with musicians I greatly admired. So it was that's the sort of final end of the journey. And that's right now, my time before COVID was divided between teaching a whole bunch of students here in town, mostly at the high school level, but a few university students as well, running the church music in Brockville at a church, and just gigging all the time, doing really cool stuff on tuba and some bass. So that is the tuba. That's sort of how it kind of came in and out and back in again. There you go. That's the whole story.
Really interesting. If I could go back, just
Please
one
do.
question in regards to music education as a kid. How important was it? I mean, you kind of answered it, but when you look back, how important was it for you in terms of understanding the potential there as being a musician and developing that skill?
Incredibly important. You still look back and think of what the things that were most meaningful for you, and I think most people agree that the experiences they have developing stick with you. Some of the bands I played in high school are still some of the most warmest experiences I've ever had. I don't know what the musical level was, but in terms of an experience, they're incredible because you learn to work together. Like you say, the teachers are very encouraging. They're the ones that recognize um, if they think somebody has enough wherewithal to try and be professional, to play or teach professionally. But even just beyond that, I think it gives kids who have an enjoyment of music, that becomes their tribe at school, and so they don't now you have a place, and all through junior high and high school, now you have somewhere you fit and you belong, and you can excel and do well. So yeah, music is super. It was vital for me, absolutely.
What was the pull towards classical? You mentioned you wanted to play classical. What was the
Hmm.
pull there? What
Well,
was the reasoning?
the tuba for a while, I guess, it's just what the tuba. That's the first thing when you start playing well, you gravitate towards, because the best parts are in the orchestral repertoire. Like you think of the Wagner Ride of the Valkyries, or you think of the Holst Planet Suite. You think of the big symphonies by Mahler, by Tchaikovsky. I mean, these are mountains to scale. They are amazing parts to play, and I got to play in a youth orchestra in Winnipeg where I grew up, and I experienced that thrill. That's where it came from. I thought, wow, this is amazing. How can anybody want something other than this? Uh, and it's a real thrill when you're playing with everybody's on their game, and you're part of that team, and it's an incredible feeling. I often say the tuba is the best seat in the house. You're surrounded by the entire orchestra. um, that's what was pulling me to that, for sure. I was taking lessons with the tuba player from the Winnipeg Symphony, and that's what we were working towards.
When you're learning an instrument, what's how do you keep yourself motivated to practice, practice, practice? So is there a particular routine? How do you maintain that frequency of practice and dedication?
Well, I think I learned to practice a little bit late, to really practice, because I had a lot of sort of, I guess you could call it, natural ability, where things came a little bit easy to a point. So you're able to just figure things out and not have to put in the painstaking work, but you hit a wall eventually and you don't know why you're hitting it. I think I finally learned to practice for real probably near the end, that time I told you about, when I decided to do that competition between after my bachelor degree and before my master's degree. Although I worked really hard in my bachelor degree too, but I didn't quite really realize it. And it just had to be a methodical thing for me. You just sit down and you just got to do something over and over again. But it has to be almost like a Zen attitude, where you're not even aware of it. You're just so deep into the fundamental of what you're doing that you don't notice the time go by. That's when you're practicing really well, for me. And the idea that any problem, no matter how large, can be broken down into smaller problems, and you can figure out exactly what it is. You just keep zooming in until you find out exactly what the little problem is, fix that, and then you can put everything back together again. And I get fascinated by that process. It's one of the reasons I enjoy teaching, because you hear someone play something and you think, let's see if we can help you figure that out and make that work better. So what motivates you? I mean, motivation is, if you have this is a hard thing. If you have something cool coming up, then you're motivated. If it's a competition, a big concert, a big gig. The last one I had was last fall, before the walls came down. I was invited for probably the best gig I've ever had, which was to play tuba in an ensemble of tuba players paying tribute to Howard Johnson, the jazz tuba pioneer in New York City, who I'd gotten to know over the years. And basically, I got to meet and play with all my heroes in one weekend. But here was the catch: they told me I was going to be playing the lead lines, the top lines, the same lines that Howard played. So I thought, I'm going to have to play for all these people. They're my heroes. I've got to sound dynamite. So that was probably the last time I really had to work really hard at something. But I knew how already. I'd learned how to break things down. I learned how to find that repetition, that Zen feeling, and just do something over and over again until it was there. And to break things down, and you know, sometimes it's as simple as doing something slow and making it incrementally faster until you're ready and have it ready. And I had to play this really high part, and Melanie was there, my wife Melanie. We both went. We went down to New York together, and we went to rehearse. And I'm just trying to keep my cool and not act like I'm completely starstruck by all these amazing musicians. And the hardest lick that I'd spent the most time learning, which was just really ridiculous. I won't even try and play it right now. It was really fast and really high. And they just kept asking for that point in the arrangement again and again and
Wow.
again. And Melanie later said she was laughing. She's like, I was just thinking of you. Like, yeah, every time you said, sure, I'll play it again. I wasn't going to let on that, but and I'm glad that I learned to practice before that happened, because that's the last time I had to do anything like that, I think. And that was just a few months after that we had the ending of all performances for a while.
Now, what did it mean for you to perform for your heroes?
It was an incredible honor, but it was really satisfying too, because um, they were so welcoming and down to earth and mutually enjoying of what everybody did, that I didn't feel there was any intimidation factor whatsoever. That we were all just there for the same reason, because we all love this man Howard, and we were all there to sort of thank him for what he'd done. And yeah, it was inspiring. It was enjoyable. It was joyful. It was humbling, and all that all together at the same time.
You also mentioned you wanted to play jazz, I think, after you got your doctorate, right? Or
Mhm.
when you got into the PhD program. What
Mhm.
was the pull towards jazz from classical?
Well, it just started a long, long time ago. I mean, even way back in high school, because we had high school jazz band, and I played bass in that band. I didn't play tuba in that band, but I always kind of thought in the back of my mind that the tuba would be really cool if it played it as well. And I discovered a few records. Again, no internet back then, so your exposure was limited to what people told you about or what was at your music store. But I the one of the teacher in cadet camp who was teaching me gave me this CD, or showed it to me. I got it myself later, and it was a tuba player by the name of Sam Palafian, who did a traditional jazz CD where he played songs like Avalon, Sweet Georgia Brown, things like that, with a Django style guitarist. But he did all the melodies and all the solos. And you're, okay, this is possible. This is really cool. And it's something that I was learning jazz on bass and piano, but I always kind of wanted to do it on the tuba. But it was a hard sell for a lot of people, because it was just not considered one of the jazz instruments unless you were in New York and you knew some of these people like Howard and people like that. It wasn't considered to do that. So I never really thought it was doable. So I did the other things instead. But it was always something I wanted to do. And as I learned to play jazz on the other instruments and ended up doing a lot of gigs on bass, like I said, I played bass on the cruise ships. I started trying to apply more and more what I was learning on those instruments to the tuba, but with very few models, like I said, without the internet, without knowing who all these people were that had done these things before. There wasn't really a model to follow. So you're just kind of swimming upstream a bit. And again, the master's degree, it was pushed a little bit farther away. It wasn't something I was pushing, because I was still thinking that, I'm going to push, uh, learn class, the orchestral playing, work on the soloist playing. Like there's a bunch of classical solos that have been written, concertos and sonatas and things like that are written for the tuba as well, and recital material that exists. Um, so just two things going on, and I guess eventually I just figured out that that's what I wanted to do, and I should just pursue that and do it. And getting more and more opportunities along the way as you just get more comfortable with it and get more opportunities to play it, just it starts to snowball. And like I say, the final thing was the doctorate program was great, because I got to study it, I got to travel, meet some people, spend tons of time on the internet, on the library, digging up all these, sketching in the history that had always been there that I wanted to know, and getting opportunities to play. I played in the chamber jazz ensemble that was, like I said, like a small big band. And there's been a lot of groups that of that size that, for one reason or another, used tuba. It started with you may have heard of the Birth of the Cool. Miles Davis did this record in 1949. We had the arrangements of Gil Evans and others that sort of took the jazz big band from the regular like jazz orchestra of about 18 players, and pared it down to about 10, and bringing in Gil Evans had experimented with orchestral instruments like the French horn and the tuba, and brought those in to sort of give different color palettes and colors and textures. So I got to play in a group like that, and I got to sit and play with the big band as well, which at McGill was always an incredible big band. And the director was really cool to give me some time to improvise and solo in the arrangements on the tuba. He was tuba friendly, as I like to say. And playing jazz um, with confidence requires that it's a catch-22. If you don't get a chance to take a solo and get over that, to learn to be in the moment, then you're not going to get much better at it. So thanks to those people, those teachers that gave me more opportunities to play in more high-level situations with better players, that's when it sort of pushed me to, okay, I can really do this. And like I said, the final thing was moving to Ottawa and getting the opportunity to play with all these great musicians here in town. That was the last layer for me.
How important is creative independence for you as a musician?
Very, very, very important. Although I appreciate um, both sides of it. Like I really appreciate people that can interpret classical music well, take notes on the page, bring them to life, and make it their own. I love orchestras and bands. I love when it works, but I do also like the ability to just play what I feel. If I'm listening to the music and say, you know what, I'm going to try this and play that. That is really that's probably why I like playing jazz, is having the ability to respond in the moment, play something different, and sometimes play exactly what's written too, if that's what's appropriate. But yeah, it's exhilarating to have that freedom to make those choices, and it's definitely something that drives me.
Well, when you're in university at a graduate level learning music, what's that like? Is what's that experience like? And are you challenged? Are you being kind of restricted? How would you describe that experience as far as graduate studies for a musician?
Well, I think it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't. It wasn't. I knew that from being at McGill doing my undergrad that the grad students were people we looked up to because their playing was at a great level, and they were doing a lot of cool, interesting things. What happens at grad school is that you have a lot more time on your hands by design. Um, so your coursework load is a lot lower, but the quality of the work they expect is higher. The papers you write, the performances you give, um, but you just have a lot more time in your hands. There's just not as much coursework in a graduate program. So you have a lot of extra time. I use that time to practice a lot, to study a lot of scores. And when I was at the U of T, one of the things I decided to do, they have an amazing music library at the U of T, an incredible collection of records, CDs, and books. It's massive. And one of the things I did there was I decided I've always wanted to listen to the entire Wagner Ring cycle, the whole four operas. I think that's probably 16 to 20 hours worth of music.
Wow.
I didn't do it all at once, but I would go in and I would speak to the librarian and I'd say, "Oh, which recording do you like for this?" And he'd say, "Oh, you've got to listen to this recording." So he had these little corrals with the record player and the nice headphones, and I'd get the score off of the shelf, and I'd sit there and I'd listen to the entire opera beginning to end. I did that for, well, maybe an act and then take a break because they're so long. But things like that, you have time for things like that. You have time to explore your individual study more, whether it's playing your instrument or academic study. And the doctorate was a little bit different in that you also end up having well, my program was a DMU, so I didn't have a thesis, but I had a doctoral paper and a lecture recital to prepare. Um, and once you get into that, then that becomes your entire focus, and you're just, it's like writing a book. You've got a whole bunch of books on reserve in your corral, and it's very, very intense. But luckily that I did it in 3 years, and that was probably more the third year was focused on that final project. The first 2 years again were exploratory, getting the chance to do reading on these topics, and having you have different guidance too in a grad program. You masters and doctorate, they pair you up with these advisors, and you spend time talking to these to your professors and to your teachers, and almost more on a peer level, discussing what it is you're trying to achieve, and the topics you're discussing. So it's a great experience, like I said, but it's very much self-directed. You have a lot of free time, but you got to use the time wisely. But you're free to explore and other things that you want to study and look into.
Now, as far as teaching new students, what's your approach to teaching students how to
Well,
play tuba and so on?
my one guiding principle, I think, is to try to tell them things that I wish someone had told me.
Wow.
That's
Like
it.
what? Like what? Let's hear it.
Just that idea that teaching them routines, things they can do, warm up exercises and stuff they can do on a daily basis that are going to solve their problems. I try to simplify things. I don't. There's been a lot of musical teaching. I won't even say brass. It's all that relied heavily on metaphor and interesting concepts that had no basis in reality, like singers being told to breathe through their eyelids and stuff. And these could be useful sayings. I mean, they worked for somebody at one point, which is why they're using them again. But there's a lot of weird. I thought literally for a while that I was breathing into my stomach because people say, "Oh, you got to breathe into your stomach." It's like, well, no, you're not really. There's no lungs down there. So I try to explain things, always refine the way I'm describing things so they can be understood by the student in the simplest way possible. I want to break things down into a this or a that and somewhere in between so that they learn um, what the controls are to play these instruments well. And like I said, how to break down problems. That's what I like to do. I like to just listen, hear where they're at. We start every lesson with the same warm up routine so I can hear how their fundamental sound is developing, how their tonguing, their articulating is developing, um, those basic things. And then we work on studies and pieces. It's just it's a very simple formula, but I find it really works and I've really been pleased with how they're doing. So yeah, I just try to tell them things that I wish someone had told me. That there are long roundabout. Sometimes there's a simpler way to get to where you're trying to go.
Now, if let's say there was a house party and the tuba was invited, would the tuba walk in like quietly, or would it walk in loudly?
I think the tuba can't help but make a huge entrance always, so it would definitely walk in loudly.
Okay, interesting. Now, if the tuba was a an athlete of a particular sport, what sport would it be, and why would it practice that sport?
I think in some ways a long distance runner because a lot of what we do involves just staying focused on and being and having endurance and just sometimes you feel solitary because you're the only one and you're very inwardly driven.
Wow.
Sometimes in an orchestral piece, a tuba player is going to have to count hundreds of bars of rest before they come in, and you just gotta be
Wow.
focused and just sitting there. Or when I'm playing Dixieland gigs, which is the tuba part, you're usually doing something like this. You're just doing that over and over again, and if a lot of people are playing around, you can be like for 9 or 10 minutes. It just goes on and on. Uh, I did it, yeah. So I think that's it. The long distance runner. It's just inwardly driven, calm on the exterior, but just focused on that goal.
Well, what's the longest you've ever played performance wise?
Hmm. That's a good question. I always think it's better to leave people wanting more, but I've had gigs that have felt really long. Usually ones involving the sousaphone, which I don't have pictured here. That's the instrument that goes over in your shoulder, just because it weighs so much in your shoulder. Um, I've had parades. I used to play military in the cadets. I think we had some parades that were 2 or 3 hours long sometimes. That was pretty long. Um, I think the one band I played with that always made me feel tired and exhausted and worn out afterward in a good way was the Lemon Bucket Orchestra. I was never their main tuba player, but I got to sub for them for a few years on many occasions. And they would just always leave everything out on the table. Every performance would usually finish with us either walking up on the bar or getting off the stage into the crowd and playing with everybody. And yeah, I always felt completely exhausted after playing with them in a good way.
Now, can you give us kind of a history of the instrument in terms of when it was first created, where it was created, and that sort of
I,
stuff.
I probably have the year wrong, but the first tuba patent was in Czechoslovakia. I think it was in the 1830s. I hope I get that right. And it was developed. This is an older looking tuba actually than the other one, although this one's made in Switzerland and it's old. I think it's as old as I am. It's from 1976. Um, the, uh, the the tuba was invented as a brass based instrument because the way they wrote for instrument families in the orchestra was that every instrument has its family. Think of the violin, viola, cello, bass. The double bass being like a bass version of the violin. And you have the same thing with the woodwinds. You have flute, you have clarinet, bass clarinet, bassoon, contrabassoon. You have these families of instruments. And trombones, you have regular trombone, you have a bass trombone, but there was no real brass bass instrument. And part of that was due to technology because trumpets and trombones, well, the trombone functions, that's the oldest low tech brass instrument. You just move the slide to change the length of the instrument. Trumpets would just play really high and change the pitch with their lips. Um, and they had some rudimentary valve systems that were built. But I mean, without any mass production and modern, metal technology, those instruments could never be reliable and good. So I often say the tuba is kind of the embodiment of the Industrial Revolution because in order to build something like this with skill, you need that kind of mechanical, technological skill. So the tuba, and the reason, yeah, so the reason you need to have these valves is because when you get an instrument this long on brass and you can't change the length of the instrument, then all you can play are these notes here. It's kind of like the bugle call notes. But it gets a little boring after a while. You're not going to be able to play the melodies, certainly. Like I said, the trombone got around that with a slide. The trumpet got around that by going higher and higher and higher up that scale. So old Baroque trumpet music was always played up at the top range where they could play notes that were next to each other. But you don't want a tuba for that. You want the tuba to be like a pipe organ to play those wonderful low notes. So in order to play all those missing notes from this to this, you need to have valves so that you can change the length of the instrument and get all the notes in between. So the tuba is like I say, it's a product of its time. It comes in the 19th century. So you think of 19th century technology, this kind of embodies it. And even though this tuba was built in 1976 and is very refined in terms of its construction, playing in tune, its sound, and everything else, it's still basically the same principles as those tubas built in the 19th century.
How heavy is it?
Oh, geez, I don't know. I can tell you. Okay, this is my large one. It weighs quite a bit. This is a large orchestral tuba. Used to belong to my teacher in the Montreal Symphony Orchestra. His name was Dennis Miller, and this is, like I say, this is a Swiss-made tuba. It's called a Hirschberger, pitched in C. It's a big orchestral tuba. The other instrument I have here is a British instrument built for brass bands and stuff. It's pitched a little bit higher. You see that these are piston valves, like you would find on a trumpet. And I know for a fact from many flights that this one, with its case, weighed 40 pounds because that was exactly the limit where you didn't have to pay extra baggage fee for a while. So I think they weigh about 20 pounds without the case. They're heavy.
So it is, as far as performing, do you stand when you're performing or do you sit?
I have done, but I try to avoid it more these days. This sousaphone, of course, stays on the shoulder. Part of it is when you're playing in the jazz stuff that I've been doing. Um, if you're not playing those bass lines, sometimes I've tried to stand with the trumpet player, the sax player, the singer to be what we call the front line in jazz, which is the instruments that are playing the melody, taking the solos. Then it's tempting to stand up because they're standing up. Because visually, you just feel like you're looking up at them. So you want to stand. So I have stood on occasion, and if I'm just going to play one solo, I might still just stand. I mean, for breathing wise, it's excellent, but for your back, it's terrible. And I've tried different harnesses and stuff, and this one is particularly this one is particularly hard to use a strap for because of the way it's built. I'm still looking for a good solution for that. And Howard Johnson, the one who I mentioned we went to go play for in New York City, um, was taken had some serious health complications, which he figures happened because of the strap on his shoulder.
Wow.
He really doesn't want anyone to do that. He'd prefer that we all sit in chairs from now on. So a stool can be a good compromise. I've sat on a stool many occasions. Um, and like I said, I tried a harness for a while, but never quite comfortable. So, if I'm just going to go up and it's a jam session, I'm just going to take my solo and then I don't have to play anymore. I'll probably stand up and play, but you don't want to do it for too long because you're putting so much, it's just really bad for your back. And when I was with that Foothills Brass Quintet, one of our things was we wanted to put on a real entertaining show. We memorized all our music. We had pre-memorized lines and choreography, and I did a lot of standing with that group because we were doing this. Well, that comes if you've seen the Canadian Brass, they're the really ones that started that. We were just following them uh, to stand and play. And so a lot of tuba players play a tuba even smaller than this one, called the tuba F, and those are nice and light, and they're with the rotary valves. And I've seen people, whoop, there we go. I've seen people stand with those with straps, and it seems quite comfortable. So when you have this design of tuba, I think it's a lot easier to bring it up and stand with it. So that's still a work in progress, I guess. But yeah, I try just most of the time now. I just sit.
When we look at music internationally, which country produces a lot of tuba players? Is there a stat on that? Which country, from what you know, produces has a large volume of tuba players?
That's a great question, and I think it's changed over time. Tuba players used to be a rare breed, and I think a lot of my music teachers who were probably taught in the 60s still thought that, like, oh, if you play tuba well, then you know what, your ticket is you're there. They didn't realize that there were already 100 people showing up to any symphony audition. I went to a few like that, like 100 different tuba players, each with two instruments. It's this no longer the case that if you just play this instrument or that instrument that the field is open. But I think at one point, well, Germany probably has a lot of tuba players. They have a big culture there of band music and orchestral music. A lot of fine players there. It's but I think you can't. The United States was really took the cake for a long time because of people like there are educators and performers that really pushed for it. I can give you some names. I mean, Bill Bell, that's a great name. Kind of starts that, and after him comes like a teacher by his name of Harvey Phillips. Harvey Phillips was a an advocate. When you said I was gonna in this interview, I was gonna have to speak about the tuba, I said no problem because that comes with the job. We're always explaining our instrument to people. We're happy to do it. But Harvey Phillips was really the king of that from his post at Indiana University. He was calling up composers, trying to get them to write more music, organizing tuba symposiums and colloquiums, tuba Christmas events, Octuba fests. He was really the one who was the organizer who was trying to push for it. And so all of a sudden you have these university studios that have 20 or 30 players, and so probably the explosion really happened in the U.S. because of
Now,
their
if
band
if you if
and orchestras and everything else.
if you were to describe the average tuba player from maybe, because I'm sure you've met many of them, how would you describe them? I know it's we're generalizing here, but how would you describe the average tuba player?
Well, I guess this I can go by the stereotype, and every stereotype has some truth to it, which is they're going to be bigger people, and that is partly at that critical instrument selection period when the band teacher has to think about which child is going to be able to suit to which instrument. And sadly, it used to be very sexist. Women played woodwind instruments and men played brass, and luckily that's not true anymore. one of the finest American tuba players right now. Plays in Philadelphia Orchestra. Her name is Carol Yanch. She won that job when she was still in university, and physically she was probably shorter than everybody too. My first teacher in Winnipeg was a person of shorter stature, smaller. So that idea that they're just big people that play is I mean I'm tall, so it didn't hurt. You have if you're tall, you have a larger lung capacity, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything. Uh, the best, one of the greatest tuba players and teachers known played in Chicago, and his name was Arnold Jacobs, and he wasn't tall at all. And they figure for the last part of his career, he was effectively playing with just the use of one lung but he was so efficient and could do so much with what he had that it didn't matter. So yeah, there's a stereotypical kind of tuba player, and if you go on forums and you see a lot of them, just you still see a lot of those types, good old boy type tuba players. They definitely exist. There's a whole bunch of them, but there's a whole bunch of diversity now too. It's not all the same. There's all types, all shapes and sizes, and genders and everything else that play the instrument. But certainly there was a stereotype and there was some truth to it for a while. But I think that hasn't been true for some time.
Is there any competition amongst players like that play the tuba, that play the sax? Is there any beef and what I'm saying? Like, are there any? Is there any heat amongst those instruments, the
Within
brass?
instruments, between instruments, I think it depends on the scene. I think the Ottawa scene's very nurturing. Everybody here is pretty kind to one another. But there is that thing in jazz they call vibing, which is that passive aggressive attitude that people
Oh
give to
God.
each other. I think sometimes like instruments are hardest on each other because they feel they're in competition. Um, Tuba players can be like that too. They can certainly be competitive, and they can be some of that is to do with the fact, like I said, if you're in the orchestral world, there's only room for one per orchestra, and there's only so many orchestras that you can even consider paying a living wage. But it doesn't mean there's lots of other things that a tuba player can't do. But we also have a reputation for being the nicest. So hopefully that can, like I say, there's individuals that can certainly be brutal to each other. But I think in general, tuba players have this great reputation for being collegial, and I've found that the ones I've met have all been amazing. They've been generous with their time, and with what they can, if they can help you, they will. I've had instruments loaned to me. I've had contacts given to me. I've had you know, from other tuba players. Maybe it helps we don't live in the same towns. They don't think we're going to take each other's gigs, but in general, no. I think tuba players have that good reputation for not being too bad with each other. But like I say, it is still competitive.
Now, speaking of gigs, can you tell us a story about your favorite performance ever? Your favorite experience performing? Where was
Well,
it? What happened? And why was it your favorite one?
I've kind of already talked about it. It was getting to play last fall for Howard Johnson's tribute, and I'll explain a little bit about why it was so great, I guess. I met Howard first in Montreal when he was playing, and I'd heard about how great he was, and my soon-to-be wife and I decided to go see him at this small club, and we talked to him, and he agreed to meet me the next day to work with me for a few hours and like a lesson, I guess. And that was a really super experience. And at the time he said he didn't even want anything from me. He says, just go buy my CDs. He said, it's all there. So I said, great, I'll buy your records. And I stayed in touch with him. And we kept up a correspondence. I would send him recordings sometimes and write letters. And he became a mentor. And you'll ask anybody, they'll tell you he's a really generous, extremely generous that way. He's always used his position in music to help others. Um, but I would see him at jazz festivals whenever he was in Canada. He was in town. I'd be able to see. I saw him play with Levon Helm on the Ramble tour, and a couple of times in Toronto. When I did my doctorate, I went down to New York City to interview him, like this, for my research, as well as another tuba player. And he was actually supposed to come up to Ottawa and visit, but we were never able to make that happen. But I saw, yeah, I just kept running into him. So he knew how I played and he knew who I was. And I got to know some of the other tuba players in his circle as well who played with him in his groups. I don't know if you ever heard of the singer Taj Mahal, the blues singer. He did an amazing record in the 70s called The Real Thing, where he took four tuba players on tour with him, Howard and Bob Stewart, Joe Daly, and Earl McIntyre, to go tour with him. They did a famous record at the Fillmore called The Real Thing. So it's Taj Mahal playing this funky blues with four tubas. It's for the 70s. It's really amazing. So I met Joe Daly, one of those, just got to know them and just communicating largely by internet as well, being able to. And so I was invited to take part in this, and I found out about a year before it happened. And he called me personally to ask if I would do it. And I said, of course I will. I'm thrilled to do it. And the planning stages, it changed here and there. Then they said they were going to bring in guest performers and all these different tuba. They're going to reunite some of the groups he played in. So when I went down there to New York City, the performance was at a place called Mercant Hall. It wasn't too far from Lincoln Center. Um, my only other visit to New York before then had been to see Howard and another tuba player, Bob Stewart. So I'd never even really seen any of the sites. We just flew in, interviewed him in his place, and another, but both in one in Harlem and one further north. We never even saw the city that visit. So this is my first visit to New York City, and I'm gonna get to play with all these people. We rehearsed at the same studio where the Saturday Night Live band rehearses. I think they passed in the hallway and went to their rehearsal space, and we were at ours. Uh, the guests included some members from Levon Helm's band, horn section. They were going to get Taj Mahal to come over from Europe and sing and redo those real thing stuff, although he couldn't make it again for medical reasons. Blue Lou was there. I don't know if you remember from the Blues Brothers, the saxophone player who says chicken wire. He was there. They had a special guest to talk about Howard and play a few tunes. That was Paul Schaefer. So all these people were there, and I'm just having such a great time and getting to play and play his arrangements and meet these amazing musicians and just have a wonderful time. So that's, like I say, and just do it, and just the feeling of love in that room, that everybody there owed him so much and was so happy to play for Howard. It was an incredible experience.
What advice do you have to give to any students who are interested in going from, say, piano to considering the tuba? What
Oh,
are
well, I guess the advice is you already took it. Learning piano first is great for anybody who wants to do anything in music. I mean, we have two daughters, aged almost 10 and 7, and we told them you have to play piano, you have to sing in a choir, and after that, you can branch out to do other things. And I don't know if you can see it here. We've our newest acquisition. Where is it? Um, Wrong side. Oh, there it is. You see in the back? There's a junior harp there.
Oh, wow, yes, yes, I see
Yeah,
it.
we've
Wow.
rented it for a few months because our eldest decided that she wanted to play harp. But because she's already played piano and she's already sung, the harp is she's sitting and playing that thing all the time. Uh, so the first advice is yes, play the piano and never stop. Even if you don't want to be a piano player, to be able to sit and visually work out your music is great. In terms of anybody learning to play the tuba, the advice is for any instrument, listen and find out who are the good players and watch and listen to them and get inspired, because that's how we learn best. We learn by imitation and by inspiration.
Now, you also mentioned
Go
that
to concerts, but we can't go to concerts.
you also mentioned earlier on that you were considering going to law school. I think you mentioned you got accepted to law school, right?
Yes, I did.
And why did you want to go to law school? And are you still considering it, or are you content with just music?
Well, I was looking for something different because, like I said, when we were living near Toronto, we did a lot of great things, and all of it was great, but it was just we didn't really have much focus, and like a lot of musicians, at some point you're like, maybe I like to try something different, because you just feel like you're going around in circles. And it was the intellectual challenge that got me interested, and more specifically, knowing that some people I knew did it. A trombone player that I played uh, got accepted. So it didn't even, for years, it didn't even seem like an option. I didn't understand how these things worked. I mean, now I know that medical and law schools aren't too worried about where you get what you study before you come to them. They just want to know what kind of thinkers you are. And there are lots of musicians that go on to those medical or law school, because they're actually quite happy to have musicians in their programs, because they know that we've learned to think creatively, and be good problem solvers, and we learn how to apply ourselves to long-term goals. But it was just it excited me, and it was just something completely different. I'd spent so much time in music; it was just nice to do something different. I decided to not do it in the end. I don't think I'm going to go there at this point, just because I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and I have things that are working out. So I don't think that's something. Maybe someday, I don't know. I'm still interested. I think I really enjoyed studying and taking the LSAT test, and I think the other thing was, just as a joke, is whenever you buy or sell a house and you go to a lawyer, and they print out a document and that they've written before, and you hand them a big check, thinking, sounds like a good racket. But of course, like any other profession, you got to work at it, and but no, I'm interested in it. One of Canada's best jazz musicians, and an Order of Canada recipient, in fact, has become a lawyer. Phil Dwyer, the saxophone player. So, you know.
So I have two more questions for you. How has technology changed music in terms of education for your instrument? Has it changed it? If so, how?
Well, I think we can all say it has, in that every music lesson being taught now, unless you're in New Zealand, is being taught by this format, either on Zoom or some sort of video streaming, because we can't be in the same room with our students face to face. But uh, one funny thing about the virus, I mean, it's been devastating. I'm not going to say it's a good thing, but it's been devastating for the performing arts. And I've seen people lose their livelihood. They just watched all their plans and gigs float away in a week in March. I myself lost a bunch of projects I was looking forward to, that I was really excited about, including a mini 3-city tour with um, a Juno-nominated saxophone player, Quinton Natchoff, who I knew from before, who lives in New York. We were going to do 3 shows in Montreal, here, and Ottawa, and Toronto, and just it was bitter to lose those things that I'd been working towards and planning. And like you say, right when I was, to be frank, at my professional peak, to have it stopped in its tracks. But I'm very grateful that I've had the teaching that I've had, and I'm very grateful this technology existed to let that teaching continue. But at the same time, it's more than just teaching back and forth like this. I soon discovered that there's benefits to teaching this way that don't happen one-on-one. Um, I will do a share screen and bring up the music, and I think there's something really powerful about both of us focused on the same surface and looking at the same music. I highlight things, and we can get really in depth with the scores. I can play a YouTube clip at a moment's notice now, and you know, if they need music, it's all digital, and there's no more scrambling for parts and scrambling for materials. It's all but all those things were there in 2019, and some musicians were getting smart and using them, and some weren't. And now we've all been forced to learn and adapt to these technologies. Um, I've been learning to edit video, and to mix audio, and to make different projects for my church choir, for my students, for myself. I've done a few streaming concerts now. Melanie and I did one for Happy Bird Music in the summer. That was really fun. We're adapting, but like I said, all this stuff was there a year ago, and some people were making use of it, and some of us, we were just kind of lagging behind a bit. So we've all been forced to try and learn these skills. And I think that if and when, and I don't know when, I'm sure it will at least be for a year or more, we start going back to normal. I don't think we'll go back to doing things the way we did them before. I think the technology will stay a big part of what we do. Uh, and I think some students might even still opt to do their lessons from home. I think some parents will say, wait, I don't have to drive across town. And, I can gain a whole hour of my day that way. And I think, in terms of the production, the recording, and all that, that's not going to go away. Just like it won't for other businesses. They're not gonna. It's not gonna be the same.
Now, one last question for you. What is the most interesting fact for you when you think of the tuba? What's that one fact about the instrument that just fascinates you
Uh,
and makes it stand out from the rest?
it's the sound. It's the sound. In the end, it always is the sound. And one thing you try and teach your students is you can learn a million notes, but cultivating your sound is what it was what makes people want to work with you, to either hire you for that orchestra or to call you for that big gig. It's the way you sound. And I'm always in love with the sound of the tuba. It's rich, it's deep, it's low. Um, there's a quote from one of the tuba players I admire, a British tuba player who actually designed this instrument in England. His name was John Fletcher, another one who sort of took the instrument to a quantum leap ahead. And he was very wry, dry sense of British humor. And there's a radio program where he did exactly what we're doing here, where he was talking to the host about the tuba. And he said, the tuba is I'm going to paraphrase, I'm going to get it mostly wrong, but he said the tuba is the biggest, the fattest, the deepest, the longest, the heaviest, the most expensive, and the least used of the brass instruments.
Wow.
So, yeah, you just fall in love with how it looks and how it sounds. I mean, I think anybody who finds their instrument, they're in love with it. I mean, whether it's the harp or the piano or percussion or bagpipes or the organ, and the tuba is definitely my favorite.
Thank you very much for your time. This has been a lot of fun, and we hope to hear some more music from you down the road. Maybe we'll do this again.
Sounds good, Garmamie. Thanks so much for having me. I always happy to talk about this.